My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 72 years old, and I'll never forget the Christmas night when my own grandson looked me in the eye and whispered words that shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces. But let me start from the beginning, because every story worth telling needs its proper foundation. I've been living in this old house in Jacksonville, Florida, for 47 years now. It sits just 3 blocks from the beach, with weathered wooden shutters that creak in the salty wind, and a front porch where George and I used to sit every evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house isn't much to look at from the outside. White paint peeling here and there, a roof that's seen better days, and a small garden where my roses still bloom despite my arthritic hands struggling to tend them properly. George built this house with his own 2 hands back in 1978. We were young then, barely in our 20s, full of dreams and determination. He worked construction during the day, and I cleaned houses for wealthy families in Ponte Vedra Beach. Every penny we saved went into buying materials: lumber, nails, paint, fixtures. We'd work on the house together in the evenings and weekends, George teaching me how to use tools I'd never even seen before. I remember the first time we laid the foundation. It was a scorching July morning, and the concrete mixer arrived at dawn. George was so proud, walking around that rectangular outline in the sand, pointing out where our bedroom would be, where we'd have our kitchen table, where our children would play. His eyes sparkled with such hope, such love for our future together. "Evie," he said, using the nickname only he was allowed to call me. "This house is going to be our legacy. Someday our kids will bring their kids here, and they'll know what real love looks like. If only he could see us now." George passed away 8 years ago from a heart attack. One moment he was watering the tomatoes in our backyard garden, humming an old Johnny Cash song, and the next moment he was gone. The paramedics said it was quick, that he didn't suffer, but I've suffered every day since. This house, which once felt like our castle, our sanctuary, became an echo chamber of memories and loneliness. Our son Michael was born in 1980, right here in our bedroom during a hurricane. The power was out, and the roads were flooded, so the midwife couldn't make it to the hospital. George boiled water on our gas stove and held my hand while I brought our beautiful boy into this world. Michael had George's strong jaw and my green eyes, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he was the light of our lives. Michael grew up running through these rooms, leaving muddy footprints on the hardwood floors George had installed himself. He learned to ride his bike in our driveway, fell from the old oak tree in our backyard, and brought home every stray animal he could find. George and I worked extra hours to pay for his baseball equipment, his school supplies, his college applications. When Michael married Sarah in 2001, we held the reception right here in our backyard. George strung lights between the trees, and I made all the food myself: fried chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens, and 3 different kinds of pie. It wasn't fancy, but it was made with love. Sarah was a sweet girl then, always helping me with the dishes, always asking about family recipes and stories from when Michael was little. Ethan came along in 2003, and oh, how that boy lit up our world. He was the most beautiful baby I'd ever seen, with chubby cheeks and curly brown hair that reminded me of Michael at that age. George built him a treehouse in our backyard, complete with a rope ladder and a little window where Ethan could watch the birds. Every weekend, that boy would be here, following his grandfather around like a puppy, learning how to use a hammer, how to plant seeds, how to fix things that were broken. "Grandma Evie," he used to say when he was about 6 years old, "when I grow up, can I live here with you and Grandpa George forever?" I would scoop him up in my arms and kiss his forehead, breathing in that sweet smell of childhood, grass stains and bubble gum and pure innocence. "This will always be your home, sweetheart," I'd tell him, always. After George died, Michael and Sarah started visiting less frequently. I understood, of course. They had their own lives, their own problems. Michael worked long hours as a plumber, and Sarah had taken a job at a dental office. Ethan was in high school then, busy with friends and sports and all the things teenage boys care about. But the silence in this house became deafening. Some days, I would sit in George's old recliner and listen to the clock tick, counting the hours until someone might call or visit. I started talking to his photograph, telling him about my day, asking for advice about repairs the house needed or decisions I had to make alone. The loneliness was like a weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe sometimes. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and reach for George's hand, only to find cold, empty sheets. I'd cook dinner for 2 out of habit, then sit at our kitchen table staring at his empty chair, As Ethan got older, he changed. The sweet, curious boy who used to help me bake cookies and water the garden became distant and impatient. When he did visit, he'd spend most of his time on his phone, barely looking up when I tried to tell him stories or ask about school. He'd gotten tall and lean like his grandfather, but there was something in his eyes now, something cold and calculating that made my stomach turn. "Grandma, this house is getting pretty run down," he said to me last spring, standing in the living room and looking around with the same expression someone might have when inspecting a car they're thinking about buying. "Maybe you should think about moving somewhere smaller, somewhere easier to maintain." The way he said it made my skin crawl. This wasn't concern for my well-being. This was something else entirely. Michael had started making similar comments too. "Mom, you're getting older," he'd say during our brief phone calls. "This house is too big for you now. Too much work. Maybe it's time to consider your options." Options. As if my home, my memories, my entire life could be reduced to a list of options. I started to notice other things too. The way Sarah would walk through my house, opening drawers and cabinets when she thought I wasn't looking. The way Michael would ask questions about my finances, my insurance, my plans for the future. The way Ethan would measure rooms with his eyes and make comments about how much space was being wasted. But I pushed those thoughts aside. These were my family members, the people I'd sacrificed everything for, the people I'd loved unconditionally for decades. Surely I was imagining things. Surely they weren't capable of the thoughts that kept creeping into my mind during those long, sleepless nights. Christmas was coming, and despite everything, I was excited. I always hosted Christmas dinner. It was our tradition, something that connected us to all those beautiful Christmases when George was alive and Ethan was small, and the world felt full of love and possibility. I spent weeks preparing. I cleaned every inch of this house until it sparkled, decorated the tree George and I had bought together 20 years ago, and planned a menu that would remind everyone of the happy times we'd shared here. I bought presents I couldn't really afford, wrapping them carefully and placing them under the tree like offerings to a life that felt like it was slipping away from me. On Christmas Eve, I stood in my kitchen making George's favorite stuffing recipe, the one his mother had passed down to him, the one he'd taught me when we were newlyweds. The smell of sage and celery filled the air, and for a moment, I could almost feel his presence beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his voice humming that old Johnny Cash song. "Tomorrow's going to be perfect," I whispered to his photograph on the windowsill. Just like the old days, but deep in my heart, I knew something had changed. I could feel it in the way Michael spoke to me now, in the way Sarah looked at my belongings, in the way Ethan had grown cold and distant. Something was coming, something that would change everything, and I was powerless to stop it. Christmas Day dawned gray and humid, typical for Florida in December. I woke up at 5 in the morning, like I always did, and started cooking. The turkey went into the oven first, followed by the ham George had always insisted on having as backup. I made sweet potato casserole, green bean almondine, cranberry sauce from scratch, and 3 different kinds of pie. By noon, the house smelled like heaven, and I'd set the dining room table with our good china, the set George and I had received as a wedding present, the one we'd only used for special occasions. I'd polished the silver candlesticks his mother had left us, and arranged fresh flowers from my garden as a centerpiece. I put on my best dress, a navy blue one with small white flowers that George had always loved, and applied lipstick with shaking hands. Looking in the mirror, I saw an old woman staring back at me, gray hair carefully styled, wrinkles that told the story of 72 years of living, eyes that had seen too much joy and too much sorrow. Michael, Sarah, and Ethan arrived at 1 o'clock sharp. Michael hugged me briefly, Sarah pecked my cheek, and Ethan mumbled something that might have been "Merry Christmas" without looking up from his phone. "Everything looks beautiful, Mom," Michael said, but his voice lacked the warmth I remembered from years past. He was scanning the room again, that same appraising look I'd noticed before. We sat down to dinner, and I tried to recreate the magic of Christmas past. I told stories about when Michael was little, about the year he'd tried to stay awake to catch Santa Claus and fallen asleep under the Christmas tree instead. I talked about George, about the traditions we'd built in this house, about the love that had filled these rooms for so many years. But something was wrong. Michael kept checking his phone. Sarah barely touched her food. And Ethan sat there with a smirk on his face, like he knew something I didn't, like he was enjoying some private joke at my expense. "The stuffing's really good, Grandma," he said at one point, but there was something mocking in his tone, something that made my heart skip a beat. After dinner, we moved to the living room to open presents. I watched as they unwrapped the gifts I'd chosen so carefully: a cashmere scarf for Sarah, a new tool set for Michael, a leather wallet for Ethan. They said thank you, but the words felt hollow, obligatory. Then Ethan did something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. He got up from the couch and walked over to where I was sitting in George's old recliner. He leaned down, pretending to give me a hug, and whispered directly into my ear, his breath hot against my skin. "We'll take over this place soon." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my entire body go cold, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I looked into his eyes, the same green eyes I'd passed down to him through Michael, and saw nothing but cold calculation and greed. He straightened up and smiled at me, that same innocent smile he'd had as a little boy, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed in that moment. Everything I'd believed about my family, about my life, about my place in this world, crumbled like old paper. I sat there for the rest of the evening, going through the motions of being a loving grandmother and mother, but inside, I was screaming. They stayed until 8 o'clock, helping themselves to leftovers, making small talk about work and weather, and anything except what Ethan had just revealed to me. After they left, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been a beautiful Christmas: wrapping paper scattered on the floor, dirty dishes in the kitchen, the lingering smell of turkey and disappointment. I stared at George's photograph on the mantelpiece, tears streaming down my cheeks. "What did we do wrong?" I whispered to his smiling face. "How did we raise a son who would let his own child speak to me like that? How did I become nothing more than an obstacle to them?" The house felt different now, contaminated somehow by the knowledge of what my own family really thought of me. Every room held memories of love and sacrifice, but now those memories felt like evidence of my own foolishness. I'd given everything to these people: my youth, my dreams, my entire life, and in return, they were waiting for me to die so they could claim their prize. I thought about all the times I'd helped them over the years, the money I'd lent Michael when he was starting his business, money I'd never asked for back. The countless hours I'd spent babysitting Ethan when he was young, feeding him, reading to him, loving him like he was my own child. The holidays I'd hosted, the meals I'd cooked, the support I'd given through every crisis and celebration. And this was my reward, to be seen as nothing more than an inconvenience, a barrier between them and what they believed was rightfully theirs. I walked through my house that night, touching the walls George had painted, running my fingers along the baseboards he'd installed, remembering every nail he'd driven, every board he'd measured and cut. This house was built with love, with hope, with dreams of a family that would honor what we'd created together. But dreams, I realized, are fragile things. They can be shattered by a few whispered words from someone you love more than your own life. As I finally made my way to bed, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The old woman staring back at me looked defeated, broken, small. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone in this house that had once been filled with so much love. But something else was stirring inside me too, something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. Pure, righteous anger at the injustice of it all, at the cruelty of being discarded by the very people I'd sacrificed everything to nurture and protect. I might be old, I thought as I turned off the lights, but I'm not dead yet. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for Evelyn Parker to remind her family exactly who they were dealing with. The days following Christmas passed in a haze of hurt and confusion. I found myself replaying Ethan's words over and over again, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. "We'll take over this place soon." The casual cruelty of it, the cold calculation in his young voice, haunted my every waking moment. I stopped eating properly. Food had no taste anymore, and my appetite vanished completely. I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, staring out the window at the life George and I had built together. The bird feeder he'd hung from the old oak tree still attracted cardinals and blue jays, but even their cheerful songs couldn't lift the weight that had settled on my chest. Sleep became elusive too. I'd lie in bed, George's pillow still next to mine, and wonder how everything had gone so wrong. Had I been blind to my family's true nature all these years? Had I been so desperate for love and connection that I'd ignored the signs that were probably there all along? 3 days after Christmas, Michael called. "Hey, Mom." His voice sounded different over the phone, distant, businesslike. Sarah and I were talking, and we think maybe it's time we had a serious conversation about your living situation. My heart started pounding. What do you mean, sweetheart? Well, you're not getting any younger, and that house is a lot of work. We're worried about you living there all alone. What if you fell? What if something happened and no one was around to help? The concern in his voice might have fooled someone else, but I could hear something underneath it now, something that sounded suspiciously like impatience. I'm fine, Michael. I've been taking care of myself just fine. I know, but Mom, be realistic. You're 72 years old. The house needs work. The roof, the plumbing, the electrical system. It's not safe for someone your age. Your father and I built this house with our own hands, I said, my voice growing stronger. Every board, every nail, every room. This is my home. There was a pause, and when Michael spoke again, his tone had shifted slightly. Mom, I understand the sentimental value, but sentiment doesn't fix a leaky roof or replace old wiring. Look, there are some really nice assisted living facilities in town. Clean, safe, with people your own age. You'd have activities, meals prepared for you, medical care right there if you need it. Assisted living. The words hit me like a slap in the face. In his mind, I was already gone from this house, already tucked away somewhere convenient where I wouldn't be a burden anymore. I'm not ready for assisted living, Michael. I'm perfectly capable of living in my own home. Are you, though? The question came out sharper than he probably intended. When's the last time you had the gutters cleaned? Or the air conditioning serviced? Mom, you can't keep up with all this maintenance. I've been managing just fine. Have you? Because Ethan mentioned that the front steps are loose, and there are water stains on the ceiling in the guest bathroom. What if the insurance company finds out about problems and drops your coverage? What if Ethan mentioned? I interrupted, my blood turning to ice. When did Ethan mention anything about my house? Another pause. He's just observant, Mom. He cares about your safety. Safety. That's what they were calling it now. Michael, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Are you hoping I'll move out of this house? Mom, it's not about what I hope. It's about what's best for you. That's not what I asked. The silence stretched between us, filled with everything he wasn't saying. Finally, he sighed. Look, Mom, if you did decide to sell the house, it would solve a lot of problems. You'd have money for your care, you'd be somewhere safe, and frankly, Sarah and I could use we could use some financial help. Ethan's talking about going to graduate school, and with the economy the way it is, there it was, the truth, finally laid bare. My home, my sanctuary, my life's work. It had all been reduced to a financial solution to their problems. I see, I said quietly. Mom, please don't be like that. We're not trying to push you out. We just want what's best for everyone. Everyone. As if I wasn't part of everyone anymore. After I hung up, I sat in George's recliner for hours, staring at nothing. The house felt different now, like I was seeing it through their eyes instead of my own. Instead of seeing the love and memories in every corner, I found myself noticing the things they'd mentioned. The water stain on the guest bathroom ceiling, the slight sag in the front porch step, the way the kitchen faucet dripped no matter how tightly I turned it off. Was I being stubborn? Was I holding on to something that was falling apart around me? But every time I considered the possibility that maybe they were right, I'd remember Ethan's cold whisper, and my resolve would harden again. The next morning, I forced myself to get dressed and drive to the grocery store. I needed to get out of the house, to be around other people, to remember that I was still a person with value and dignity, not just an obstacle to be removed. At the store, I ran into Dorothy Henderson, an old friend from church. Dorothy was about my age, a widow like me, and we'd known each other for nearly 30 years. Evelyn, how are you, honey? How was your Christmas? I opened my mouth to say the usual pleasantries. Fine, wonderful, blessed. But instead, I found myself starting to cry right there in the cereal aisle. Dorothy immediately put her arms around me, not caring who might be watching. Oh, sweetheart, what's wrong? I couldn't tell her everything, couldn't betray my family's secrets to someone else, but I found myself saying, Dorothy, do you ever feel like you're invisible? Like the people who are supposed to love you most in the world see right through you? She pulled back and looked at me with those wise, kind eyes that had seen their share of heartbreak. Honey, are we talking about your family? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Come on, she said, taking my arm. "Let's go get some coffee and talk." We sat in a little cafe near the store, and I found myself telling Dorothy more than I'd intended. Not everything. I couldn't bear to repeat Ethan's exact words, but enough for her to understand that my family was pressuring me to leave my home. "They think I can't take care of myself anymore," I said, stirring sugar into my coffee with shaking hands. "They think I should sell the house and move to some assisted living place." Dorothy listened without interrupting, her face growing more serious as I talked. "Evelyn," she said finally, "can I ask you something? Do you have your affairs in order? Your will, your important papers, all that legal stuff?" I think so. George and I went to a lawyer years ago, when Michael was in college. We had wills made, power of attorney documents, all of that. When was the last time you looked at those documents? I couldn't remember. It had been years, maybe decades. After George died, I'd been so lost in grief that I'd barely been able to handle the funeral arrangements, let alone review legal paperwork. "Honey," Dorothy said gently, "maybe it's time you took a look at those papers. Not because your family is right, but because you need to know exactly where you stand. Knowledge is power, especially when people are trying to make decisions for you." That afternoon, I went to my bedroom and pulled out the old metal filing cabinet where George had kept all our important documents. It was dusty and the lock was stiff, but I finally managed to get it open. Inside were folders labeled in George's careful handwriting: insurance, medical, house, legal. I pulled out the legal folder with trembling hands and spread the contents across our bed. There were our wills, written in legal language that was hard to understand. There were the power of attorney documents Dorothy had mentioned. And there, at the bottom of the stack, was something I'd completely forgotten about: the deed to our house. I picked it up, squinting at the small print. Property deed for 247 Seashore Drive, Jacksonville, Florida. Owners: George Edward Parker and Evelyn Marie Parker. The date was from 1978, when we'd finally finished building the house and made it legal. But there was something else there, something I didn't remember. A separate document, stapled to the back of the deed. I read it once, then again, then a third time before the words really sank in. It was an addendum, dated 1995. I remembered now. We'd gone back to the lawyer that year because George had been worried about estate planning. We'd been in our 50s then, starting to think about the future, about what would happen to our property when we were gone. The addendum established something called a life estate. George had insisted on it, saying he wanted to make sure I'd never have to worry about anyone forcing me out of our home. According to this document, I had the legal right to live in this house for the rest of my natural life, regardless of any other considerations. The house couldn't be sold, couldn't be taken, couldn't be transferred to anyone else as long as I was alive and wanted to stay here. George had protected me, even from the grave. I sat there holding that document, tears streaming down my face, feeling like he was in the room with me. He'd known, somehow, that this day might come. He'd known that I might need legal protection from our own family. "Oh, George," I whispered to the empty room, "you wonderful, wise man. You're still taking care of me." But even as relief flooded through me, a new fear took its place. If Michael and Ethan didn't know about this life estate, and I was fairly certain they didn't, what would happen when they found out? How far were they willing to go to get what they thought was theirs? I spent the rest of the day reading through all the legal documents, trying to understand every detail. The life estate was ironclad. I could live here until I died, and no one could force me to leave. But what happened after I died was another matter entirely. According to our wills, everything would go to Michael, just as we'd planned when he was a loving son who respected his parents. The question was, what kind of man had Michael become? And what had he taught his son about family, about loyalty, about respecting your elders? That evening, as I sat in the living room with George's legal protection spread out on the coffee table before me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I wasn't going to be pushed around or manipulated or made to feel like I was a burden. I was going to fight back. But first, I needed to know exactly what I was fighting against. I needed to understand just how far my family was willing to go, and what their real plans were for me and my home. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before in my life. I called Michael and lied to him. "Michael, honey, I've been thinking about what you said. About the house, about assisted living, about everything." I could hear the change in his voice immediately, a sharpening of attention, a barely concealed excitement. "Oh, Mom, I'm so glad. I really think this could be the best thing for everyone. Well, I'm not ready to make any decisions yet, I said carefully, but I was wondering, if I did decide to move, what would happen to the house? Well, we'd have to sell it, of course. The market's not great right now, but the location is good, close to the beach. We might have to put some money into fixing it up first, but I think we could get a decent price for it. Well, it would go to me eventually anyway, right? So it would make sense for me to handle the sale, deal with all the paperwork and contractors and everything. You wouldn't want to be bothered with all that. There it was again. That assumption that I was already out of the picture, already irrelevant to decisions about my own life. And what about the money from the sale? Oh, that would go toward your care, of course. Assisted living can be expensive, especially the nice places. But don't worry, Mom. We'd make sure you were comfortable. Comfortable, like a pet being put in a kennel. Have you and Sarah talked about this much? About what you do with the house? Well, yes. We've discussed it. We have to be practical about these things. Sarah thinks we should modernize it completely. Update the kitchen, redo the bathrooms, maybe even add on. The lot is big enough. If we're going to sell it, we want to get the best price possible. I closed my eyes, picturing them walking through my home, planning its destruction and reconstruction, erasing every trace of the life George and I had built there. What about Ethan? What does he think about all this? Michael laughed. Oh, you know how young people are. He's got all kinds of ideas about what we should do with the place. He thinks we should keep it, maybe turn it into a rental property or something. Generate some income from it. A rental property. They wanted to turn my home, the place where I'd raised my son and loved my husband and lived my entire adult life, into a source of income for them. Well, I said, my voice carefully neutral, I appreciate you being so thoughtful about all this. I'm not ready to make any decisions yet, but it's good to know you're thinking about the future. Of course, Mom, we love you, and we just want what's best. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring out the window at the bird feeder George had hung so many years ago. A cardinal was perched there, its bright red feathers brilliant against the gray December sky. George used to say that cardinals were messengers, that when you saw one, it meant someone who had passed was watching over you, sending you a sign. What should I do, George? I whispered. How do I fight this? As if in answer, the cardinal turned its head and looked directly at me through the window. Then it spread its wings and flew away, but not before I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. There was another cardinal in the oak tree, and then another in the rose bushes. As I watched, more and more appeared until my entire backyard was filled with bright red birds. More cardinals than I'd ever seen in one place. An army of messengers. I smiled for the first time since Christmas. George was telling me something, and I was finally ready to listen. It was time for Evelyn Parker to stop being a victim and start being a fighter. The cardinals were gone by morning, but their message remained clear in my heart. For the first time in weeks, I woke up with purpose. I had work to do. I started by calling Dorothy. Honey, I need a favor, I said when she answered. Do you know a good lawyer? Someone who deals with family law and estate planning? As a matter of fact, I do. My nephew Robert practices law here in Jacksonville. He's honest, fair, and he doesn't talk down to older folks like some of them do. Want me to give him a call? Please. I need to understand exactly what my rights are, and I need to make sure all my legal documents are updated and airtight. 2 days later, I sat in Robert Henderson's office, a modest place with warm wood paneling and family photos on the desk. Robert was about 45, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and his Aunt Dorothy's gentle manner. Mrs. Parker, he said after reviewing all my documents, I have to say, your husband was a very wise man. This life estate is exactly what you need in this situation. So they can't force me out? Absolutely not. You have the legal right to remain in that house for the rest of your life, period. No one can sell it, rent it, or take possession of it while you're alive and of sound mind. The only way you could lose that right is if you voluntarily signed it away. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. What if they try to pressure me? What if they claim I'm not competent to make decisions? Robert's expression grew serious. That would require a legal proceeding, with medical evaluations and court hearings. Based on our conversation today, I can tell you that you're clearly of sound mind and perfectly capable of making your own decisions. But Mrs. Parker, can I ask you something? Are you afraid of your family? The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. Was I afraid? I thought about Ethan's cold whisper, about Michael's calculating tone, about the way they looked at my house like vultures eyeing carrion. I don't know, I admitted. I never thought I would be, but lately, I don't recognize them anymore. Here's what I'm going to do, Robert said, pulling out a legal pad. I'm going to draft some additional documents for you. A new will, first of all, because I suspect you might want to make some changes to your current one. He was right. The thought of everything going to Michael after the way he'd been treating me made me sick. Now, I'm also going to prepare what's called a competency statement, a legal document signed by myself and a doctor, stating that you are of sound mind and fully capable of making decisions about your property and your life. If anyone ever tries to challenge your mental capacity, this will be powerful evidence in your favor. Over the next week, I worked with Robert to update all my legal affairs. The hardest part was changing my will. For 50 years, I'd assumed that everything I had would go to Michael, and through him, to Ethan. But now, I want to leave the house to charity, I told Robert during our second meeting. Something that helps elderly people, maybe builds affordable housing for seniors. Are you sure about this, Mrs. Parker? It's a big step. I thought about all the years I'd spent loving Michael unconditionally, all the sacrifices I'd made for his future. Then I thought about his voice on the phone, excited at the prospect of selling my home out from under me. I'm sure, but I don't want to tell them yet. I want to see how far they're willing to go. Robert nodded. That's your right. We can keep this confidential for now. When I got home from the lawyer's office that day, there was a car I didn't recognize in my driveway, a shiny black sedan with rental plates. My heart started pounding as I pulled into the garage. Who was here? What did they want? I found my answer when I walked into my kitchen and discovered Ethan sitting at my table, casually eating a sandwich like he owned the place. "Hi, Grandma," he said without getting up. "I hope you don't mind. I let myself in. Mom gave me the spare key." I stared at him in shock. Sarah had given him my spare key? Without asking me? "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "Just checking on you," he said, but his eyes were scanning the room, taking inventory. "Dad said you've been thinking about moving to assisted living. I wanted to see what kind of condition the house is in." "Excuse me?" He stood up, leaving his plate and crumbs on my table, and walked over to the window above the sink. "Yeah, the kitchen definitely needs updating. These appliances are ancient. And look at this faucet. It's dripping again." He reached over and turned the handle tighter, his movements confident and familiar, like he was already the owner making improvements. "Ethan, I didn't invite you in here to inspect my house. Come on, Grandma. Don't be sensitive. We're family. I'm trying to help." He opened one of my cabinets and peered inside. "When's the last time you cleaned these out? Some of this stuff looks like it's been here since the 80s. I watched him pawing through my belongings, this young man I'd loved since the day he was born, and I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. "The house is fine, Ethan." "Is it, though?" He turned to face me, and I saw something in his expression that made my skin crawl, because from where I'm standing, it looks like a lot of work, a lot of expensive work, and you're not getting any younger. There was something different about him today, something more aggressive than I'd ever seen before. He seemed bigger somehow, more imposing, and I realized that I was actually afraid to be alone with him. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. "Why? We're just talking." He walked past me, close enough that I had to step back, and headed toward the living room. "Dad said you might be ready to make some practical decisions about your future." I followed him, my heart racing. "Ethan, please, I'd like you to go now." In a minute, he was looking around my living room like he was appraising it, and I saw him pick up one of George's antique lamps, turning it over to look at the bottom. "Put that down. Relax, Grandma. I'm not going to break it." But he didn't put it down. Instead, he carried it with him as he walked around the room. "You know, this stuff might actually be worth something. Antiques are popular now. That lamp belonged to your grandfather's mother. It's been in this family for over 60 years. Exactly. Vintage." He set it down on a different table, not where it belonged. "You should probably have this stuff appraised. For insurance purposes." I knew what he was really thinking. He was already calculating the value of everything in my house, already planning what to keep and what to sell. "Ethan, I want you to leave. Now." For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance that I was standing up to him. Then he smiled. That same charming smile he'd had as a little boy. "Sure, Grandma." I didn't mean to upset you. He headed toward the front door, then paused and turned back. Oh, by the way, Dad wanted me to ask you, have you found those legal papers yet? Your will, insurance stuff, all that? My blood turned to ice. Why would he want to know about that? Just practical stuff. Making sure everything's in order, you know? In case something happens. In case something happens. The words hung in the air between us like a threat. I can handle my own affairs, thank you. Of course you can. But wouldn't it be easier to let Dad help? He's good with paperwork, and you've got enough to worry about. I walked to the front door and opened it. Goodbye, Ethan. He walked past me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive that I knew I hadn't bought for him. Think about what I said, Grandma, about having things appraised. You might be surprised at what some of this old stuff is worth. After he left, I double-locked the front door and went around the house checking all the windows. My hands were shaking, and I felt violated somehow, like he'd contaminated my space with his greed and entitlement. I called Dorothy immediately. He just walked into my house like he owned it, I told her, my voice trembling. When he was going through my things, asking about my legal papers, talking about having everything appraised. Oh, honey, did you change your locks after George died? I hadn't. It had never occurred to me that I might need protection from my own family. You need to do that tomorrow, Dorothy said firmly. And maybe you should think about getting a security system too. Dorothy, I never thought, this is my grandson. I used to rock him to sleep, teach him to ride a bike, bake cookies with him every weekend. I know, sweetheart, but people change. Sometimes the hardest thing to accept is that the people we love aren't who we thought they were. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. The house settling, the wind in the trees, the neighbor's cat walking across my porch. I kept thinking about the way Ethan had moved through my house, touching my things, evaluating their worth, acting like I was already gone. At 3 a.m, I got up and went to the kitchen to make some tea. As I waited for the water to boil, I noticed something that made my heart stop. The spare key wasn't in its usual spot on the hook by the back door. I searched everywhere, the counters, the drawers, the floor in case it had fallen, but it was gone. Ethan had taken it when he left, probably slipped it into his pocket when I wasn't looking. Now he could come back anytime he wanted. He could bring Michael and Sarah. They could walk into my house whenever they pleased, go through my things, make plans for my property while I slept. I was no longer safe in my own home. The next morning, I called a locksmith and had every lock in the house changed. Then I drove to the bank and put all my important papers, including the new will and the life estate documents, in a safety deposit box that only I could access. When I got home, there were 3 missed calls on my answering machine, all from Michael. I called him back, and he answered on the first ring. Mom, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all morning. I had errands to run. What's wrong? Ethan said he stopped by yesterday and you seemed confused, upset. He's worried about you. Confused. That's how they were going to play it. Make me seem like a confused old woman who couldn't think straight. I wasn't confused, Michael. I was angry that he let himself into my house without permission and started going through my belongings. Mom, he was just trying to help. He noticed some things that might need attention, and he thought he'd start making an inventory of my possessions. There was a pause. What's that supposed to mean? You know exactly what it means. Another pause. Longer this time. When Michael spoke again, his tone had changed. Mom, I think maybe we need to have that talk sooner rather than later. About your living situation. About getting you some help. I don't need help. The fact that you're getting paranoid about family members who are just trying to look out for you suggests otherwise. Paranoid. Now I was paranoid. Michael, let me make something very clear to you. This is my house. I built it with your father. I've lived in it for 47 years, and I'm not going anywhere. If you or Ethan or anyone else enters my property without my permission again, I'll call the police. Mom, you're scaring me. This doesn't sound like you at all. Maybe you never really knew me. I hung up before he could respond. For the rest of the day, I sat in George's chair, staring out the window at the street. Every car that passed made me tense up, wondering if it was them coming back. I felt like I was under siege in my own home, a prisoner of my own family's greed. But I wasn't helpless. I had legal protection. I had changed the locks. And I had Dorothy and Robert Henderson on my side. Most importantly, I had something my family didn't know I possessed. the knowledge of what they really wanted, and the determination to deny it to them. That evening, as I sat in my kitchen eating a simple dinner of soup and crackers, I made a decision that would have shocked the old Evelyn, the one who had spent her whole life putting family first, sacrificing her own needs for the people she loved. I was going to set a trap. I was going to let them think they were winning, let them reveal just how low they were willing to sink, and then I was going to teach them a lesson they would never forget. It was time for my family to learn that you don't mess with Evelyn Parker. My trap was simple but effective. I called Michael 3 days later, my voice carefully crafted to sound tired and defeated. Michael, honey, I've been thinking about what you said, about assisted living, about the house being too much for me. I could practically hear him perk up on the other end of the line. Oh, Mom, I'm so glad. I really think this is the right decision. I'm not ready to move yet, I said, letting a tremor creep into my voice. But maybe you could come over this weekend. Help me start going through some things, decide what's worth keeping and what isn't. Of course, Sarah and I can be there Saturday morning, and Ethan too, if that's okay. He's actually got some good ideas about organizing and, valuating things. Valuating. Not organizing. Valuating. That would be wonderful, I lied. I'll make lunch. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical January weather in Jacksonville. I spent the early hours preparing, but not in the way they expected. I made sure all my important documents were safely locked away at the bank. I called Dorothy and asked her to check on me around 2 o'clock, and to bring her nephew Robert if possible. Most importantly, I set up the small digital recorder George had given me years ago to record family stories. I tucked it into my sweater pocket and pressed record. They arrived at 10 o'clock sharp, all 3 of them, and I could see the barely contained excitement on their faces. They thought they were finally going to get their hands on my property, finally going to catalog and claim everything I'd spent a lifetime accumulating. "A morning, Mom," Michael said, giving me a perfunctory hug. "Where do you want to start?" "Well, I thought maybe the attic first. There's so much up there. Things I haven't looked at in years." "Great idea," Sarah chimed in. "Sometimes the most valuable stuff gets stored away and forgotten about. Valuable stuff, not sentimental items or family treasures. Valuable stuff." We climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, a space George had finished himself to give us extra storage. Boxes lined the walls, labeled in my careful handwriting. Christmas decorations, Michael's school papers, photo albums, George's tools. They went at it like vultures on roadkill. "Mom, what's in this box?" Michael asked, pulling down a container marked household items. "Oh, just some old dishes and things. Nothing important." But Ethan had already pried it open and was pulling out my grandmother's china, delicate pieces painted with tiny roses, each one a work of art. "Grandma, this is Haviland china," he said, his eyes lighting up. "This stuff is worth a fortune. Look at this mark on the bottom." He turned over a teacup, and I watched him examine it like a prospector studying gold. "Really?" I said, playing my part. I had no idea. George's mother just called it the good dishes. "The good dishes," Sarah laughed. "Oh, Evelyn, this is museum quality. We need to have it appraised immediately." As if it already belonged to them. I moved to another box, one labeled George's uniforms, and started to open it. Michael was there instantly. "What's in there, Mom?" "Your father's Navy uniforms from the war. He was so proud of his service." "Mind if I take a look?" I stepped aside, and Michael pulled out George's dress blues, the uniform he'd worn when we got married, the one he'd been buried in. But Michael wasn't looking at the uniform with respect or sentiment. He was checking the pockets. "Sometimes old military stuff has value with collectors," he explained, not meeting my eyes. "Ya medals, insignia, that kind of thing." He found George's Purple Heart, the medal my husband had earned when he was wounded in Korea, the medal he'd kept in his sock drawer and only showed to Michael once, when the boy was old enough to understand what it meant. "Now this," Michael said, holding it up to the light. "This could be worth something significant." I felt something die inside me. This wasn't about helping me downsize or preparing for a move. This was about money, pure and simple. My family was treating my life, my memories, my husband's legacy like items at a garage sale. "Oh, look at this," Ethan called from across the attic. He'd found my hope chest, the cedar chest my own grandmother had given me as a wedding present. Inside were my wedding dress, George's letters from the Navy, my children's baby clothes, photo albums dating back to the 1940s. Ethan pulled out my wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown that had cost me 2 months' wages from my job at the Five and Dime. "This is in really good condition," he said, holding it up. "Vintage wedding dresses are hot right now, especially something this authentic." He wanted to sell my wedding dress. My wedding dress. The dress I'd worn on the happiest day of my life. The dress I'd carefully preserved for nearly 50 years, hoping maybe someday a daughter or granddaughter might want to wear it. "Ethan," I said quietly, "that's my wedding dress." "I know, Grandma, but when's the last time you looked at it? It's just taking up space. Someone could actually use it instead of it sitting in a box getting moth-eaten. Someone could use it." As if my memories, my most precious possessions, were just unused inventory waiting to be liquidated. For 3 hours, I watched my family systematically catalog everything I owned, discussing market values and resale potential while I stood there like a ghost in my own attic. They found George's coin collection, my mother's jewelry, first edition books that had belonged to my father, photo albums filled with family history. Everything had a price tag in their minds. Nothing had sentimental value that couldn't be converted to cash. The final straw came when Sarah found a small wooden box tucked behind some Christmas decorations. "What's this, Evelyn?" she asked, opening it without waiting for an answer. Inside were the letters George had written to me during the war. Letters so personal and intimate that I'd never shown them to anyone, not even Michael. Love letters filled with his hopes and fears and dreams for our future together. Sarah pulled out one of the letters and started to unfold it. "These are probably historically significant," she said. "World War II correspondence, written by a real soldier. There are collectors who specialize in this kind of thing." She was going to read George's most private thoughts meant only for me, and then sell them to strangers. "Stop," I said quietly. Sarah looked up. "What?" I said. "Stop. Put that back. Evelyn, I'm just trying to help you understand what you have here. These letters could be worth—" "I don't care what they're worth." The words came out louder than I'd intended, and suddenly the attic was silent. All 3 of them stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Michael stepped forward. "Mom, are you okay?" "No, Michael, I'm not okay. I've been watching you for 3 hours. Treat my entire life like merchandise at an auction. That's my wedding dress your son wants to sell. Those are your father's war letters your wife is pawing through. This is my life, my history, my family's legacy, and you're reducing it all to dollar signs." "Mom, we're trying to help," Sarah said, but she didn't put the letter down. Are you really trying to help me? Or are you trying to help yourselves?" The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken truths. "You know what?" Ethan said finally, his voice sharp with irritation. "Maybe we should just call this off. Grandma's obviously not ready to be practical about this stuff." "Practical," I repeated. "Is that what you call it?" "What would you call it?" he shot back. "Holding on to a bunch of old junk that's just going to end up in the trash anyway." "Ethan," Michael warned, but it was too late. The mask had slipped. "No, Dad, I'm tired of pretending. Look around this place. It's falling apart. She can't take care of it anymore. She can't take care of herself. We're wasting time going through boxes when we should be talking about real solutions." "Real solutions like what?" I asked. He looked directly at me, and I saw in his eyes the same cold calculation I'd seen on Christmas night, like accepting that you're not going to live forever, and making decisions that make sense for everyone involved. Everyone involved. As if I wasn't everyone, as if I was just an obstacle to be managed. "You mean decisions that make sense for you? Fine, yes. Decisions that make sense for me, for Dad, for our future. This house is wasted on one old woman who can't even fix a leaky faucet." Michael started to say something, but I held up my hand. "No, let him finish. I want to hear all of it." Ethan stepped closer to me, and I saw something in his face that actually frightened me. Not just greed, but genuine resentment, as if I was personally responsible for standing between him and what he thought he deserved. "You want the truth, Grandma? Here's the truth. This house should have been ours years ago. You're sitting on a gold mine while Dad and I struggle to pay bills, while I can't afford to go to graduate school, while we all pretend that you're somehow still capable of living here alone." "Ethan, that's enough," Michael said, but there was no real conviction in his voice. "No, it's not enough. She's being selfish. Pure and simple. She's holding on to stuff she doesn't need, living in a house that's too big for her, hoarding money and property while her own family does without." I stared at this young man I'd loved since he was born, this stranger wearing my grandson's face, and I felt my heart break all over again. "Is that how you see me?" I asked quietly. As selfish. I see you as someone who's lost touch with reality. Someone who cares more about old junk and empty rooms than about her own family's welfare. The recording device in my pocket was capturing every word, every cruel syllable, but I barely remembered it was there. All I could think about was the little boy who used to climb into my lap and ask me to tell him stories about when his daddy was small. And what would you have me do, Ethan? Sign the house over to Dad. Move somewhere you can get proper care. Let us handle the practical stuff while you focus on, I don't know, whatever old people focus on. Whatever old people focus on. As if my thoughts, my feelings, my very existence was irrelevant now that I'd passed some arbitrary expiration date. I looked at Michael. Is this what you want too? He couldn't meet my eyes. Mom, maybe we could find a middle ground. Maybe you could sign over legal control but still live here until what? Until you're ready to make the transition. The transition. Death. He was talking about me dying as if it was a business transaction. Sarah stepped forward, still holding George's letters. Evelyn, we're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to plan for the inevitable. Wouldn't you rather have input into what happens to your things instead of leaving us to guess? I looked at the three of them, my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandson, and realized that I was looking at strangers. Somewhere along the way, the people I'd loved most in the world had become people I didn't recognize, people motivated by greed and entitlement, and a fundamental lack of respect for who I was and what I'd sacrificed for them. But I wasn't the helpless old woman they thought I was. I wasn't confused or senile or ready to be put out to pasture. I was Evelyn Parker, and I'd been fighting battles longer than Ethan had been alive. You want to know what's inevitable? I said, my voice growing stronger with every word. What's inevitable is that I'm going to disappoint you. I walked to the corner where my purse was sitting and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were copies of all my new legal documents, the updated willie, the life estate papers, everything Robert Henderson had prepared for me. You see, while you've been planning my funeral and dividing up my possessions, I've been doing some planning of my own. I handed Michael the life estate document. This was signed by your father and me in 1995. It gives me the legal right to live in this house until the day I die, regardless of anyone else's wishes or plans. Michael's face went white as he read. That means, Michael, that you can't sell this house. You can't rent it out. You can't sign it over to Ethan or anyone else. As long as I'm alive and want to stay here, this is my home. Period. But Mom, Michael stammered, the will says, the will has been changed. I pulled out another document. As of last week, this house will not be going to you when I die, Michael. It's going to the Jacksonville Housing Authority, to be used for affordable housing for senior citizens. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the shock, the disbelief, the growing anger on all their faces. You can't do that, Ethan said finally. I can, and I have. This is my property, my decision, my life. You don't get to dictate terms to me just because you're impatient for me to die. Mom, please, Michael said. You're upset. You're not thinking clearly. We can work this out. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. You want to know what's not clear thinking? Not clear thinking is spending 50 years sacrificing everything for people who see you as nothing more than an inconvenience. I took back George's letters from Sarah's hands and put them carefully back in their box. You want to know what I focus on, Ethan? I focus on the fact that I raised your father to be a man of integrity, and somewhere along the way, he forgot what that means. I focus on the fact that I loved you from the moment you were born, and you've repaid that love by treating me like a burden to be disposed of. I looked at each of them in turn. You came here today thinking you were going to catalog my belongings and plan my exit strategy. Instead, you've shown me exactly who you really are. And you know what? I'm grateful for that clarity. At that moment, I heard voices downstairs, Dorothy's cheerful hello, and a man's voice I recognized as Robert Henderson's. That would be my friend Dorothy and my lawyer, I said calmly. I asked them to stop by to witness this conversation. Michael's face flushed red. You recorded us. I patted the device in my pocket. Every word. Robert thought it might be useful to have documentation of any attempts to coerce me into signing away my rights. Ethan looked like he wanted to say something, but Sarah grabbed his arm. We should go, she said quietly. Yes, I agreed. You should. They filed past me toward the attic stairs, and I felt nothing but relief. No sadness, no regret, no lingering love for the people they'd revealed themselves to be. At the top of the stairs, Michael turned back. Mom, I'm sorry it came to this. I really was trying to help. No, Michael. You were trying to help yourself. There's a difference. After they left, Dorothy and Robert came upstairs and found me sitting among the scattered boxes, holding George's Purple Heart in my hands. How did it go, Mrs. Parker? Robert asked gently. Exactly as I expected. They showed me their true colors, and I showed them mine. Dorothy sat down beside me. Are you okay, honey? I looked around the attic, at all the memories and treasures that had been pawed through and evaluated like merchandise, and then I looked at George's medal, still warm from my palm. You know what, Dorothy? For the first time in months, I'm better than okay. I'm free. Over the following weeks, my family made several attempts to contact me. Michael called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that ranged from angry to pleading to threatening. Sarah sent a letter claiming they'd been misunderstood and asking for another chance to work things out. Ethan sent text messages that I deleted without reading, but I was done. I'd spent 72 years putting other people's needs before my own, sacrificing my dreams and desires for the sake of family harmony. I'd given everything I had to give, and it had never been enough. Now, finally, it was my turn. I started volunteering at the senior center, reading to residents who could no longer see well enough to read for themselves. I joined a widows' support group, where I met women who understood what it meant to rebuild your life after loss. I began taking art classes, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for when I was busy taking care of everyone else. Most importantly, I started living for myself instead of for other people's expectations. 6 months later, I was in my garden when I saw a familiar car pull into my driveway. My heart skipped a beat, but it wasn't fear this time. It was something closer to pity. Ethan got out alone and walked slowly toward where I was kneeling among my roses. He looked different somehow, smaller, less arrogant than the last time I'd seen him. Hi, Grandma. I looked up at him, this young man who had broken my heart so completely, and felt nothing but sadness for what we'd lost. Hello, Ethan. Can we talk? I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees, and studied his face. There were dark circles under his eyes, and something that might have been shame in his expression. What do you want to talk about? About everything. About how sorry I am. About how wrong I was. I waited, saying nothing. I know you probably can't forgive me, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I know I said things that were unforgivable, but I needed you to know that I've been thinking about who I used to be, before I became so angry and greedy and awful. He looked around the yard, at the flowers George had planted, at the house we'd built with love and hope. And I remember sitting in that tree with Grandpa George, listening to him tell stories about when Dad was little. I remember you teaching me to make cookies, letting me lick the bowl clean. I remember feeling so safe here, so loved. A tear rolled down his cheek. I don't know when I stopped seeing this as home and started seeing it as property. I don't know when I stopped seeing you as my grandmother and started seeing you as an obstacle. But I know it was wrong, and I know I hurt you in ways I can never take back. I stood there listening to him, this young man who looked so much like George had at that age, and I felt my heart crack open just a little. What do you want from me, Ethan? Nothing, he said quickly. I don't want anything from you. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, and that I understand why you changed your will. I understand why you can't forgive me. Who says I can't forgive you? He looked up, startled. Forgiveness isn't about what you deserve, sweetheart. It's about what I deserve, and I deserve to live without carrying anger in my heart. I walked over to him and touched his arm gently. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean going back to the way things were. Some damage can't be undone. He nodded, tears flowing freely now. I know. I miss you. I miss being your grandson instead of a stranger who hurt you. I looked at this boy I'd loved so much, this young man who'd caused me such pain, and I made a decision that would have surprised the old Evelyn. Come inside, I said. Let me make you some tea. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd fed him countless meals, where George had taught him to flip pancakes, where we'd been a family before greed and entitlement poisoned everything. I'm not going to change my will back, I told him as we drank our tea. The house is still going to the housing authority when I die. I understand. But maybe we can work on rebuilding something between us. Not the way it was, but something new. Something based on who we are now instead of who we used to be. I'd like that, he said quietly. I'd like that very much. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Michael and Sarah never apologized, never acknowledged how they'd treated me. They moved away 6 months later, and I haven't heard from them since. But Ethan and I slowly, carefully, began to build a new relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. He visited once a week, not to catalog my belongings, but to help with small repairs and to listen to my stories. Sometimes he'd bring his girlfriend, a sweet young woman named Emma, who reminded me a little of myself at that age. On my 75th birthday, Ethan showed up with a small wrapped package. "It's not much," he said as I opened it, "but I thought you might like it." Inside was a photograph in a simple silver frame. It was a picture of George and me from our wedding day, but it wasn't one I'd ever seen before. We were dancing, lost in each other's eyes, completely oblivious to the camera. "Where did you get this?" "I found it in some of Dad's old stuff when he was packing to move. He was going to throw it away, but I couldn't let that happen." I stared at the photograph, at the young woman I used to be, at the man who'd loved me completely and protected me even after death. "Thank you," I whispered. "There's something else," Ethan said. I've been thinking about what you said about the house going to the housing authority, about helping other seniors." I looked up at him. "I want to help with that. When the time comes, I want to be involved in making sure it becomes something Grandpa George would be proud of, something that honors what you and he built here." I reached across the table and took his hand. This young man who'd broken my heart and was now trying to help me heal it. "And he would have liked that," I said. "He would have liked that very much." As I write this story now, at 76 years old, I'm sitting in the same chair where George used to read his newspaper, looking out at the same garden we planted together all those years ago. The house is still mine, still my sanctuary, still filled with memories of love and loss and hard-won wisdom. I learned something important during that terrible Christmas and its aftermath. Sometimes the people we love most are capable of hurting us in ways we never imagined possible. But I also learned that we have more strength than we think, more power than we realize, and more choices than anyone wants to give us. I spent most of my life being who other people needed me to be, the dutiful wife, the sacrificing mother, the accommodating grandmother. But in the end, I discovered that the most important thing I could be was myself. My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 76 years old, and this is my house, built with love and protected by law, and defended with the fierce determination of a woman who finally learned to value herself as much as she valued everyone else. And I'm not going anywhere.